Production funding for Another View comes from the Hampton Citizens Unity Commission, using the time, talents, and skills of a broad base of citizen volunteers to help break down racial and cultural barriers, working to achieve the City of Hampton's community plan for a healthy, diverse community. And from the African American Programming Advisory Group, community visionaries assisting WHRO to engage, enlighten, educate, and entertain all communities in Hampton Roads. And now, Another View.
Hello, I'm Barbara Hamley, and welcome to Another View. Are you a movie buff? Do you prefer blockbusters, or are you one who likes films that are edgy, unique, that push the envelope? Old Dominion University and the City of Norfolk are presenting a 4-day celebration of indie films from around the world, March 25 through 28, and tonight we're going to talk about 2 of those films that may be of particular interest to you. Now, on the second night of the ONFilm Festival, ODU and the City of Norfolk will present From Africa to America, 2 visions of identity in the 21st century. Joining us to talk about the films are the Honorable Ambassador Bismark Myrick, former Ambassador for the United States and Ambassador in Residence at ODU, Eleanor Earl, Assistant Professor of English and Cinema Studies at Hampton University, Dr. Cassandra Newby-Alexander, History Professor at Norfolk State University, and Phill Branch, Assistant Professor of English and Cinema Studies, also at Hampton University. Thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Eleanor, I want to start with you. Why is it so important for us to be able to see indie films?
Indie films are very important because they are an indicator of the pulse of where our nation is in terms of what's going on socially, politically, etc., and also around the world. So independent films reflect what's going on and happening in that regard.
So they don't have the commercial feel to them that other films do, or do they?
Well, sometimes they can, but more often than not, they do not. They're not going so much for that same commercial element that some of the studio films go for.
Okay. So we have 2 films that we're going to talk about today, and so we're going to start with the first one. And Ambassador Myrick, this film has a personal touch. You have a personal connection to the film. It's called Mayor B, and tell us a little bit about it.
Well, thank you, Barbara, and I commend you and the Old Dominion University and the City of Norfolk for featuring this outstanding opportunity to express our art. And as it relates to Merribee, this is a film on the life of pioneering activist Madame Annette Mbaderneville from Senegal. Pioneering in that she was the first professional journalist of Senegal, and her life spans several generations of social activism that touched not only Africa but as well the United States.
She has an incredible story. Now, she was educated in Paris, correct?
She was first educated in Senegal and did her further studies in journalism in France and Paris.
Okay. Now, Merribee, the film that we have, the edition that we were able to get, is all in French. So I want to tell our viewers that we are going to show a clip from this, but then we're going to ask you to interpret on the other side.
Okay.
Okay.
Mon diplôme qui fait que je suis très fière de dire, je suis non pas la première femme, mais la première sénégalaise diplômée en journalisme. Mes grandes joies, rétrospectivement, c'est d'avoir rencontré et discuté presque d'égal à égal avec des personnes comme Birago Diop, comme Amadou Ampateba, comme Doudou Gueye, parce que moi j'ai trouvé que je m'étais enrichie à leur contact et que j'aurais dû moissonner davantage si j'étais plus organisée, plus méthodique, j'allais dire beaucoup plus fourmi que cigale.
Ta richesse, ce sont tes doutes, que probablement personne n'a soupçonné. Ce sont tes interrogations, ce sont les multiples engagements de tes vies.
Now, I don't speak French, but clearly she was speaking, I would assume, about some of the major figures that she was able to interview during the time.
Yes, first, Barbara, I want to point out that this film, this documentary, is a production of love, in that it was produced by Madame Annette's son, the filmmaker William Usman Mbaye. And in this documentary, he captures the various incidences in the life of his mother as she traveled around the world promoting her profession as a journalist. And the scenes that we saw her in touch with a number of world figures. She has been very active in the international women's movement. We will see glimpses of her with people such as Dorothy Height with the Congress for Negro Women. She was invited to the United States, where she met with President Jimmy Carter. And she has been decorated by all of Senegal's heads of state, from Leopold Senghor to the President Abdoulaye Wade.
Now, you're married to her daughter.
I'm married to her daughter, and I'm very pleased to be in the family. Her daughter, Marie-Pierre Mbaye Myrick, who also has been involved in film production and has assisted in the production of this movie.
Now, Madame d'Urneville was she was a revolutionary. I mean, she really believed in women's rights and so forth. And didn't she start a program at Goree Island?
Oh, yes. Well, she's a poet as well. And her poetry, unlike the literature of her generation, did not focus so much on political developments, but on social issues. She was keen on elevating the status of women, for example, and she has extended that to this part of her life, where she is the director of the Women's Museum at Goree Island. It's the first such museum dedicated to the art, the life, the lifeways of women in Africa.
And Goree Island was the stepping off point for the slave trade coming here to America, so that has even more. Now, she has spent time in Portsmouth and received the key to the city, and I think we have some pictures of that. And she just, you know, has been afforded the dignitary, or the pomp and circumstance, if you will, of being a very special person in this area also.
Well deserved, and she has brought to the attention of this community in Hampton Roads the importance of being attentive to human development, to removing whatever obstacles that prevent the fulfillment of talent on the part of human beings, and especially women. And she brought those visions here to Hampton Roads, and she was recognized. She spoke at community groups and was awarded the key to the city by the city of Portsmouth, Virginia.
Great. Now, Eleanor, what can we learn from films like this? Why is this type of film important? This very personal story of a son to a mother. But what does that show you from a cinema perspective?
Well, from a cinematic perspective, there are a number of things that can be ascertained from that. Most importantly, dealing with that dyadic relationship of mother and son is quite special to see from his point of view just how he viewed his mother in relation to how people from all over the world actually saw her. As a matter of fact, when I was reading the background
information, they were saying how he kind of got on her nerves sometimes.
I'm sure that probably may have happened, because it's definitely a medium where you have to be very open and willing to have someone peer into your history in quite a very unique and very focused way. So his mother, of course, I'm sure was a bit maybe challenged by that, but empowered at the same time that he was interested in doing so.
Doesn't it also give other aspiring journalists and others an opportunity to learn some history?
Most definitely. From a historical point of view, there's so much material there that anyone coming to it, no matter if they have never heard of the subject matter for any particular film, going into it, watching a documentary such as this, they can learn so very much.
Now, we have another film, and it's called Revolution 67, and it's about Newark, New Jersey. Cassandra, tell us what was going on back in 1967 in Newark.
Well, you know, the riot in Newark was really part of a long train of riots that occurred in a lot of urban cities, both in the North and in the South. A lot of it was triggered by the frustration of near the tail end of the civil rights movement. In fact, we would see riots in '64 and '65 all the way through '66 and '67. A lot of people associate these urban riots with the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., but it had nothing to do with him. It had everything to do with the explosion of frustration that many African Americans felt at that particular time. You had police brutality, you had a very reactive government, you had the Vietnam War, you had a disproportionate number of African American men sent to the war, you had really an assault on public education. And so, and of course the ongoing discrimination in housing, employment, jobs being lost to not only to the South but also offshore. And so a lot of African Americans were quite frustrated. This was supposed to be the America, the dream, and they were unable to achieve that dream, and they were really forced and confined into a small, very poverty-stricken area.
Part of the city. Let's take a look at the film, and then we'll talk on the other side.
Race riots since those 2 years ago in the Watts section of Los Angeles rocked New Jersey's largest city, Newark, for 5 consecutive days and nights. At least 24 persons are killed. More than 1,800 wounded.
So Newark was a hotbed for change.
American cities were in crisis situations.
I mean, I got beat. I thought I was going to get killed, actually.
The riots at the time seemed to me to be a rebellion, an understandable rebellion against racism, against police brutality.
We haven't owned up to what happened to our cities.
We knew about Watts, we knew about, I can't remember who came first, but so there was always that sense of what's it going to happen here.
Bad housing, bad services.
And then all of a sudden you got riots and fear. It's no wonder that people decide we're out of here.
And so we lived through a terrible time. 26 people altogether.
I don't know if Newark has fully recovered from it.
No, don't tell me about history unless you tell the truth.
But probably the bigger truth is that Newark is a city that's been victimized like so many other cities.
As wild of joint as America is,
you have to know what happened.
Now, Phil, I was watching you when you were watching this clip, and you had a physical reaction. I mean, your face, your body language.
I did. I'm from Newark. So for me, I lived in the period with the aftermath of driving to school every day or on the buses and seeing the gutted out buildings growing up and not really having full context for why this was happening. And my parents were teenagers when this went on. So I watched a piece of this film with my father, who couldn't watch it because he was shot at by the National Guard as a teenager. And my mother, I told her I was doing this, and I told her about what we were talking about, and she talked about the tanks riding down the street when she was a little girl. She was 14 and being afraid to go outside to get milk and bread, but you had to leave. And she talked about how the guardsmen were really nasty and would say nasty things as you walked back and forth to the store. So growing up in Newark and seeing how the city seemed to never rebuild, and to kind of have this context, and you mentioned the King connection. Until I watched this film, I assumed that those riots happened post-King. So I had sort of merged.
This is pre-King.
Yes.
This is pre the assassination of Dr.
And I had merged those things together, and so it was a really fascinating film. And to talk to my parents in the last day or two about the films has been interesting to get that context, and to go back home to Newark now and see a stadium, to see an art center, and you see that they are rebuilding, but they're not rebuilding for the people who have lived through all this for the last 40 years. They're not rebuilding for those people. Those people are being pushed out. It's a pretty fascinating study.
But is this yet another reason why it is so important for us to have indie films, so that this type of information can be preserved?
It is. I think that you have to find ways to make history available to people. Everyone's not going to have the chance to go to school and go to college and study all these things. And I think having indie film, which usually ends up on, public television
actually,
stations.
this film aired on public television back in 2007.
Where everyone can get the information, I think, is very important. Otherwise, we may lose that history if we don't see it. And I grew up there, and I learned something that I didn't know from watching this film.
Now, you're an actor. Eleanor, you're a filmmaker and actor. I think both of you make films. Is that correct?
I'm a writer primarily. I've been acting. Okay. I'm a writer. I love storytelling, and I just started acting.
And I'm a director-producer.
Okay. Now, talk about how difficult or easy is it
oh, it's really
to make
easy.
to make indie films? But there are a lot of people who say, you know, I want to be in film, I want to do films. Tell us a little bit about what is that process and what does it take?
One thing that it definitely takes is a great deal of fortitude and tenacity. Two things, rather. Fortitude and tenacity. You have to be really strong in spirit in terms of determination and focus. And then you have to just have that stick-to-itiveness that is needed in order to do things such as learn the craft and also to go about doing the fundraising component that
I was gonna ask you
is
about
entailed
the financial side.
to see a project come to fruition. So, yeah.
Do you have to be in Atlanta or New York or LA, or can you actually make films here in Hampton Roads?
Most definitely. Most definitely. People are doing it every day here in Hampton Roads, and that's really exciting to me. I'm originally from Portsmouth, and it's been really exciting for me returning back home to Virginia and seeing that there's this wonderful burgeoning community of filmmakers who are here making a difference and contributing to the canon of film in this area.
Dr. Newby-Alexander, in teaching history, do you use indie films? Do you look at that as yet another source to make sure that history is being captured properly?
I do. In fact, it does concern me greatly that our understanding of past events comes through the lens of commercial endeavors. With all Hollywood films, they're all, especially any films dealing with race, they all seem to have to do with the redemption of whites. The background story has to do with the racial situation, but the front end story is really about white redemption, and so you don't get the full gist. It's tantamount to what we see today, a number of people writing about the 1959 school desegregation using only the Virginian Pilot articles as their source of information from the media.
Without looking at the New Journal and Guide and at other sources,
right.
for example.
And especially when people are always talking about how it impacts the white community versus how it impacts the community at large. You have to look at all sides, and most indie films really try to transform that lens into a lens that is more inclusive. Let's hear from all these different sides. Let's look at from all these different perspectives, because they're not trying to sell to an audience. They're trying to tell a story.
And one of the things that came out of Revolution 67, for example, is about the sniper situation in Newark. Right. Tell us a little bit about that, Phil, from you.
Well, just even the language, you know, sniper, how it was used, and how you can just use language to empower people to do bad things to other people. You know, using the sniper as sort of the catalyst for all the shooting and for all the things that the police did, that the National Guard did at that time. You know, it put black men in a position of being these evil beings, and what happens is, you know, when you just use that word and use that language, it's shorthand for people just to assume black, sniper, bad, as opposed to opening up their minds and to really read and to think and to get perspective as to what was going on.
One of the things I noticed about indie films or any films that you were talking about, the commitment. Ambassador Myrick, your brother-in-law took 14 years, is that right, to make the film? How do you stick with something that long? It's got to be a labor of love.
Yes, as I said earlier, it is a labor of love. But of course, you know, when you're in this type of art production, you're doing often a variety of things. So while 14 years on this film, he was also doing other films, and his films focus on the social experience. And I find the value of all this work as I teach history and political science is that students can use this as a tool for their further understanding of conditions. And it breaks down some of the stereotypes, not only as it relates to African Americans and African American experience, but also, in the case of Merrowby, the African experience, because it exposes us to a whole set of educated Africans who are making important impacts on the universe.
Now, the director is also going to be with us on the 26th, is he?
Well, we're not absolutely certain now because Merrily is also being previewed in several European countries and in Senegal. So it will depend on his schedule.
Okay, well, that's great. Well, we're just about out of time, but I do want to remind our viewers that these two films will be on March the 26th. If I'm not mistaken, correct?
Correct.
And you can go to onfilmfest.odu.edu, I believe is the website. I may have that wrong. Oh, here it is. I've got it right here. www.onfilmfest.com for more information. The whole film festival runs March 25th through 28th, 2009, and it is the On Film Festival Indie Films, sponsored by Old Dominion University and by the City of Norfolk. Thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I want to thank our guests, Ambassador Bismark Myrick, Assistant Professor Eleanor Earl, Dr. Cassandra Newby-Alexander, and Assistant Professor Phill Branch. When we come back, we'll meet a new rising star, and he's guaranteed to capture your heart. But first, here's some happenings around Hampton Roads. He's a professional actor and model and has performed on stage, television, and film, and he's just 7 years old. He's from right here in Chesapeake. Meet Malik Hawkins.
He's only 7 years old, but Malik Hawkins is well on his way to achieving his dream.
Dreams do come true, and it starts with me and you. Do you dream? Do you have dreams? I have a dream of making it to the big screen.
Malik was recently cast in the movie To Hell and Back, which is scheduled to begin filming next month. In the film, Malik plays Omar Gooding's character Ira as a child, so we asked the young thespian to recite a line or two for us.
I remember some of my lines.
Okay, tell me a little bit about it.
Shut up! If he wake up, he gonna kill us!
Victor Dowell wrote the film and will also act in it.
This was a story that I had in my head for years, because it's based on actual events from my family. So I just started writing, and it started coming together, and it just started flowing, and before I knew it, I had a script.
He says he knew Malik had to be a part of this project after working with the Chesapeake native on another movie called Cycle, which looks at domestic violence.
In the movie Cycle, you have to cry. What do you think about when you have to cry for a part?
I don't really think about anything. I just try to make my eyes water and make it look like I'm crying. Gonna use facial expressions.
You got an infectious personality, and when you talk to him, you walk away and you remember. You know, some people you can talk to for hours, and as soon as you walk out of the room, you don't remember anything about them. But with him, even if it's just a few words, you know, you remember little things about him, and they just stick with you. That's one of the reasons why I had to cast him in the film that we did, because after talking to him, I just thought to myself, we got to have him on the set as much as possible. I just like his personality.
Well, what about the rest of you?
I heard Pop screaming and it scared me. Hey, Pop, I was just calling you for help.
Malik is no stranger to the camera. He's appeared in countless magazine and newspaper ads, television commercials, and numerous plays.
Malik, you've worked with some pretty famous people in your young career. Who have you worked with?
I did something with Clifton Davis, Tatiana Lee, and Miguel Nunez.
Okay, and what was that about?
It was a play.
No. Okay, what was the name of it? Do you remember?
The greatest love story ever told.
But even with his impressive resume, Malik says his favorite thing to do is miming. The rambunctious 7-year-old may take his acting seriously, but he never forgets to take time out to be a kid. And he has some advice for other youngsters interested in a career in front of the camera.
Just follow your dreams.
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
I just love it when 7-year-olds have dreams. That is fantastic. We so appreciate you joining us for Another View. Check out our website at www.anotherview.tv and sign up for our eView. Each week we'll send you an email letting you know about upcoming programs. You can always write us at 5200 Hampton Boulevard, Norfolk 23508. And we'll see you next week for Another View. Good night, everybody.
Production funding for Another View comes from Hampton's 400th Anniversary Committee and the Hampton Neighborhood Commission, partnering with neighborhoods throughout the city, working hand in hand to create vibrant places we are proud to call home and celebrate. And from the African American Programming Advisory Group, community visionaries assisting WHRO to engage, enlighten, educate, and entertain all communities in Hampton Roads.